Welcome, listener. This is Sebastian Nothwell, today talking with Sarah Wallace about Permafrees. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, how are you?
I am well, and so glad to have you back again.
I'm excited to be back.
So, Permafree, what's up with that?
Permafree. It is not as it potentially sounds like a superhero power. I was telling my friend about permafreeze and she was like, "What? Like freeze?" Not Dr. Horrible. So it's a first in series free. It's the first book in your series that you set to free. If are there any writers listening, if you wander into any indie author chat for any length of time, you will see like FFIS or FISF or permafree. And it's the free first in series. And it's a marketing strategy, essentially. To use a corporate term, it's a loss leader, essentially. So you drop your first book in the series to free to encourage readers to buy the other books in the series.
I get the impression that some indie authors are kind of afraid of permafreeze because they're afraid of giving a book away for free and they kind of see it as a lost sale.
Yes.
I think a free book is less a lost sale and more a reader gained, because like the person who was going to download your book for free is not someone who was just about to spend real money on it, but oops, you made it free and now you've lost that sale. Like, no.
Right. Yes.
This is someone who would not have heard of your work otherwise, who might not have picked it up otherwise, who maybe it's been on their to be read pile for a while and they haven't been able to justify it, but now that it's free, you've moved up to the top.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a much better way to look at it. So I just set my first book, Letters to Half Moon Street, free January 1st of this year. And prior to this year, it was my biggest selling or my highest selling book. So I was very nervous about dropping it to free because I was afraid I would lose out on the money that I had been making. And it was the only book in my series that was consistently selling. And so I was very nervous about dropping it to free because I was like, cool. So I'm going to drop the one book that is selling to free, and then all the other books that aren't selling, no one's going to buy. How is that a good idea? But I did the math right before this call because I was curious. So, unrelated to my Medlin Men series, which is what Letters to Half Moon Street is part of, I have another series out. So, if I don't count Breeze, Bells, and Bridegrooms, I have sold just under 400 books so far this year since dropping Letters to Half Moon Street free, which is over half what I sold entirely last year. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, even if we don't count Breeze, Bells, and Bridegrooms, which is currently my biggest selling book, dropping Letters to Half Moon Street has made a massive difference in my sales because the books that weren't selling now are. Because they get Letters to Half Moon Street for free. And so my second book is a novella, One Good Turn. And because it's novella, I priced it a little bit lower. So it's like $3, which I'm not saying that people should do that necessarily. It's what I did because my second book happened to be a novella. But if your second book happens to be a shorter book, it's worked out really nicely for me to have one book free, the second book cheap, and then the third and fourth books at the regular $5 price. Because One Good Turn is now my second highest selling book. And I suspect it's partly because it's cheaper and people see the free book and see the $3 book and they're like, oh, well, I might as well get the first two books. It's just $3. So that's something that I did. It was not an intentional tactic. It just happened to work out that way. And I think it's been working really well. If you are thinking about setting a book to free, I think the first thing I recommend doing is updating the back matter in all of your published books to include links to all of your published books. If you have Vellum, part of their update, I think, is that you can create a back matter that you can apply to every book, and there's like a little radio button or a checkbox at the bottom that says, don't include this book or this title. And so you can just make one back matter piece and then just apply it to all your books, and it's pretty easy.
That sounds absolutely magical.
I love Vellum. It's really great. So make sure you have the links in the back of your books because otherwise you will be losing some money because people in general, not just readers, but people don't always do the research of looking for a book if it's inconvenient. So you want to make it as convenient as possible to your readers. If they love your book and then there's a link at the back of the book to buy the next book, then they are much more likely to buy it than if there is no link because then they don't know if you have another book and you don't know what frame of mind they're going to be in at the end of the book, if they're going to be willing to go look you up and then find out if you have other books.
The number of people who have reviewed Tales from Blackthorn Briar a year after its publication with, I didn't realize So King Holly King even had a sequel, has been very enlightening for me.
Yes. Update your back matter, Sebastian.
I'm working on it.
Even before I dropped the book to free, I did see a bit of an increase in sales after updating all the back matter for my books. It is a bit of a pain in the ass if you are a wide author who has published books directly to multiple platforms because you have to go and re-upload it to every platform. So I will admit, I don't love when I have to do that. It becomes an obnoxious thing every time I set up a book for pre-order and then it's available. It means I have to update every book twice per book release.
Oh no.
Yeah. But I don't know if I've updated. No, I haven't updated them with Spellmaster of Cutting on Crest yet. I need to do that because if people read through the whole series and then they get to the end of Dear Bartleby and they find out that book 5 is on pre-order, then they're more likely to pre-order it because they're already in that mindset. So, first recommendation is update all of your back matter links. The second bit of advice I will admit, is something I'm parroting from Erin Wright, who teaches a lot of classes about publishing wide, which if you are curious about learning more about publishing, indie publishing, I recommend checking her out because she does have very interesting classes, and I learned something in every class I've taken from her. But she recommends waiting to drop your first book to free until you have 3 books out and the 4th available for pre-order.
I was just about to ask.
The only challenge with that rule is it's a very good rule, but the only challenge with that is that for people who have duologies or trilogies, that doesn't really work. It only works if you have 4+ books in a series. But I imagine that goes in general if you have 3 books out and the 4th book, whether or not it's the 4th book in a series or the 2nd book in a series, as long as you have all of your links updated in the back of the book and they're all within the same genre, then I imagine that the same idea applies in terms of waiting so that you can make the most of the investment, I guess, as it were.
So now when we're saying permafree, we're talking ebooks, not paperbacks, right? Because
Yes.
I don't know that it's possible to do permafree as a paperback, but also
No, you would actually lose money on that one. No, it's just the ebooks, and I didn't drop my audiobook at all. So it's just the ebooks that have been dropped to free. And for Letters to Half Moon Street as an example of one, because I'm still learning as I go. This is my 3rd month of doing this, so I'm still learning things. But Letters to Half Moon Street, despite being a free ebook, has sold 50+ copies of paperback and or audiobook. So it's still actually making money, just not as much as it was before necessarily, but people who might get the ebook for free who want to get the audiobook and listen along or switch back and forth between ebook and audiobook if they have WhisperSync, or if they love the book and they want the paperback for their shelves, you can still sell that same book even if you are giving it for free.
I also feel like probably readers are encouraged by getting the free ebook, enjoying it, and now they actively want to support you and might be seeking out paperback and
Yes.
audiobook.
Yes, I would imagine so as well. Yes.
And also for audiobooks specifically, like, if you read the first few pages of Letters to Half Moon Street for free, or even the whole thing for free, and you're like, dang, I gotta hear this, you also already know that, like, the audiobook is worth the investment because you know that the writing is already good.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing I learned recently is, from what I can tell, libraries are not included in the free price drop. So you still make money on the ebook if libraries purchase it via Hoopla or Libby, or Overdrive, I should say. You still make money that way. And I'd have to do research on Kobo Plus. I don't know for sure. I don't think you make money on Kobo Plus reads, but I'd have to look at that actually. I should look into that. I don't get a whole lot of Kobo Plus reads, so I very rarely look at the reporting for it because I make like at most $3 and I'm like, woo! Don't spend it all in one place. But so I hardly ever check my Kobo Plus reads. I should, but yeah.
I am excited to learn more about Kobo Plus as it expands, and also eagerly anticipating them expanding into the Brazilian market specifically.
Oh, do you have a lot of Brazilian readers? That's fascinating.
I have a shocking number of Brazilian readers, which is
That's so cool.
part of my motivation for learning Portuguese, but also like
That's very cool. That's awesome. I love that.
but also like the conversion rate is not super favorable for them to like buy an ebook outright.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are kind of dependent on Kindle Unlimited to read ebooks in any way budget-friendly fashion. So it's just like me persistently emailing the Kobo Plus support people being like, so Brazil when? So Brazil when? Brazil soon?
Kobo Plus is great. Just a small plug on Kobo Plus, even though it's tangential to what we're talking about. Authors get paid on the time spent reading the book rather than the pages read, which I think is an interesting choice. Authors get paid on rereads, which KU does not pay you for rereads. You only get paid for the one read. I think the idea behind paying authors through time read as opposed to pages read is to reduce like bots just clicking through books.
Oh, interesting.
That would be my guess. I don't know.
Here I was going on like a formatting tangent in my mind, being like, okay, so like the Kindle Unlimited model for pages read favors the people who do like a lot of back and forth dialogue with a lot of page returns because that increases the number of pages. But Kobo Plus favors denser writing with long, long tangled paragraphs and semicolons because that increases the time read. And really, there was a much simpler answer the whole time.
Like, KU doesn't pay for rereads, so like even flipping back and forth doesn't actually increase anything, which is such a bummer. I remember all the times I had read KU books and like had checked them out, even though I'd already read them and was rereading parts, because I was like, well, the author's getting, a little bit of money from me rereading this chapter. No, they weren't getting anything. They don't even pay for it. Which is really sad. I know. But yeah. So yeah, sorry, back to Permafrees. So setting the book down to free is the first part of the strategy. And then the second part of the strategy is a lot more work. But so far, I would say it's worthwhile. The second part of the strategy is the marketing side of it, which if you're an author, don't be intimidated by the marketing word. You don't have to go on Instagram or social media and shout about your book a whole bunch. I've actually shouted about my free book surprisingly little in the past 3 months. I have had about 11,000 and a half downloads.
Dang.
We're close to 12,000 downloads.
That's several downloads, Sarah.
That's quite a few downloads. And I talk very little about it on social media. So this is largely through the marketing that I've been doing. So again, if you spend any time in indie author circles, you will probably also hear either a promo site, words like promo sites, or paid newsletters. I stopped calling them paid newsletters because whenever I would try to explain this to my friends, they thought that I was charging people for my newsletter, which is not remotely what this is. So promo site is a little easier, I think, for people to wrap their head around what it is. So it's basically sites like BookBub, Fussy Librarian, Free Booksy, Book Barbarian. There are a plethora of these sites that send out emails on a regular basis, either daily, weekly, whatever, to a subscriber list with free or cheap books deals. And then readers subscribe to these lists because it's typically free for the readers to subscribe. They can fill a little form when they create a profile with what kind of books they want to get. And then the site will send, as part of their subscriber thing, they'll send out a list of books to their subscribers with, okay, here are all the romance books that are free or cheap right now. And then the readers can go and download all those books. In order to really cash in on your free book, the best plan is to then go to these promo sites and try to get your book on the lists. That typically involves some amount of money expenditure. The most expensive ones are usually the most useful ones, but you can kind of start small if you want. Lots of $5, $10, or free even sites that do this. Obviously, the free or $5 ones are going to have less of an increase in downloads or sales because their subscriber list is typically smaller. If you go to a site like BookBub or Fussy Librarian or Book Barbarian, those are going to be more expensive because they have a bigger subscriber list. BookBub has subscriber lists of 1 million plus readers on some of their genre lists, and it costs hundreds of dollars to get your book featured on those lists. But if your book gets approved for a BookBub deal, then that means that your book is getting in front of as many as 1 million people, which is obviously a massive thing. And obviously not everyone's going to read their emails every day. So you might even get 10,000, but even 10,000 new readers who have never heard of you before is a pretty big deal. So it can be a really, really big bump in downloads and a bump in sales.
Absolutely. I think we'd all like 10,000 new readers.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Exactly. And as we talked about at the beginning, it kind of all winds up becoming a little bit of a circle thing where, like Sebastian said, that's 10,000 new readers that I didn't have at the beginning of the year. That I'm pretty sure I've spent less than $200 so far, that I've gotten over 10,000 new readers, which is pretty good for less than $200. And I've also made that money back at this point because I've sold a little under 400 books. So, I've made that money back in sales from my other books. It takes a long time for you to make back the return on your investment with indie publishing, especially if you're getting art commissions, if you're doing audiobooks. It can be very pricey to indie publish. But this part of indie publishing sounds expensive at the outset, but it actually, for me at least, has not been as expensive as I thought it would be because I really have been making my money back pretty fast. Another thing about BookBub is it can be very expensive. A few things of note for that is first off, you want to, from what I've heard, you want to steer away from any of the priced book deals. So like $1, a $2.99 book deal, anything like that, because those tend to be picked up by trad book publishers. I think that's what they're kind of geared towards. So the competition is very steep, and from what I've heard, you won't make as much of a return on your investment with that. So there's that. And if you write in any kind of a niche genre, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably do, then I recommend going for the smaller genre categories. BookBub is kind of famously difficult to get a BookBub feature deal, and I got mine on the very first try. And I'm pretty sure it's at least partly because I went for the LGBT category rather than romance or historical romance or fantasy genres that they have to offer. And the LGBT category subscriber group is quote unquote small compared to their other ones because it doesn't have 1 million subscribers. It has, I think, 280,000 subscribers.
A mere 280,000 subscribers.
A mere 280,000. Is that even worth it? Yes, it's worth it. It's still 250,000 people. And it was significantly cheaper when I submitted my free book to the LGBT category. It was $145 to submit that. And I don't know how much money I made on that day, but I've made over $200 on Amazon alone from those sales. So I made money back. So it wound up paying it for itself. So if you write LGBT books, if you write any kind of subgenre, poke around through the BookBub price list. Your book might qualify for a subcategory, and those tend to be cheaper and less competitive. You're a little more likely to get it. And again, it's a smaller subscriber group, but I still had over 3,000 downloads that day. Like in one day, I had 3,000 people downloaded my book. Over 3,000. So that's a significant amount of people to have downloaded it in a single day. That's what I recommend for BookBub is to poke around through their sub-genre list a little bit and see if you can get your book into one of those, because it can help to be a sub-genre writer.
I feel like also it's going to get you in front of the readers you want and the readers who will appreciate you, because like romance is such a big broad genre and it's kind of infamous for having so many niche down subgenres in it, because like you can get romance readers who only read Amish romances, you can get romance readers who only read Scottish Highlander romances. Like
yes,
it gets so specific.
Yes.
And then because yes, Letters to Half Moon Street is a romance and it's a beautiful romance and everyone listening should go read it, but
it's free.
Didn't you hear? But it's not just a romance, it is specifically a queer romance, and it's specifically a queer, cozy fantasy romance taking place in an alternate Regency setting with magic. So, like, not every romance reader is going to want that, but I bet several people listening heard that and were like, oh my god, finally a book for me.
Yes. And that was the other reason I went for the LGBT category, because I was imagining in the Venn diagrams of LGBT readers who might be open to reading a romance novel, the Venn diagram overlap is a lot bigger than the romance readers who are open to reading an LGBT romance.
And even romance readers who are open to reading a queer romance might rather be reading a contemporary queer romance.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's very true.
As opposed to historical or fantasy.
Yes. Yeah. So the more niche you can get, the better in general, really, I think. But on BookBub, if you can find, they don't have like a ton of categories, but they do have a pretty, you have to scroll down when you get through their categories. So they have a good amount. And to Sebastian's point, Aaron Wright, the person I've taken classes from, writes solely cowboy romance. So like I've taken a lot of her advice and it's been gold. And sometimes she gives advice and I'm like she had a whole thing about she doesn't juice paperbacks for pre-orders. And I'm like, my readers really love paperback. I don't know if that's because of the demographic I have or what, but for me, paperbacks are a pretty big deal to get right. So I always put some for pre-order and I always check through the paperbacks before the book goes on sale. That was a small tangent, but I'll just say the BookBub has something for everybody.
Something for everyone.
So, in regards to strategizing, and again, I'm echoing a lot of stuff that Erin Wright taught in her BookBub class, which I think is available for replay if you are wanting to learn more about BookBub from more of an expert, because I've had a single BookBub deal and she's had multiple ones. So, she's teaching classes on how to get them. So, I recommend checking out her BookBub class, where she goes into this in a lot more detail. But I learned from her class that a good way to optimize, I guess, the promo sites is to stack them, which Erin Wright isn't the only one who's taught this. I've seen other writers talk about promo stacking, but essentially you've got your heavy hitter promo sites like BookBub, Book Barbarian, Free Booksy, Fussy Librarian, etc. Those ones are the ones that are most likely to give you a big spike in downloads. But for a lot of them, you can only submit about once every 6 months. So once you submit it and get accepted, you can't submit again for another 6 months. I also feel like I should clarify with BookBub, you don't pay until you get approved. So you're not paying $150
That's good.
just to submit. I forgot to mention that. You're not paying a whole bunch, hundreds of dollars to submit your book in the hopes that you get picked. You get picked, and then you have a certain time period, I think it's 48 hours or something, in which to pay. So you've got time. So, I mean, make sure you had the money available.
This feels much more achievable now.
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot to explain that. For something like Fussy Librarian, you pay immediately, but there's no approval process. You just pick the date, and then they're like, good, give us your money. So, some of them doesn't require an approval process, and some of them do. The ones that do, you don't have to pay until you get approved. So I need to clarify that. So figure out your heavy hitter ones. You can do that with like a hunt around through some of the author sites, or again, if you take a class like Erin Wright teaches, and parse those out so you're doing like one big one a month. And then do your smaller ones, like the free or $5 ones, and stack those in the same month. I've currently been going about 3 promo sites per month, is what I've been averaging. And so I'll do one big one that's $20 and up a month. And then I do a free one and a $5 one, or a free one and a $10 one, or a $5 one and a $10 one, whatever. And I kind of speckle the smaller ones in around the big ones, so that way I can kind of maximize those downloads. One thing I did learn with BookBub is that I had stacked one of the smaller ones too close to the BookBub deal, and I don't actually know how big of a spike the second one gave me. Because it was so close to BookBub that I don't know if that was just BookBub continuing to have an impact, and how much of it was actually the other site that was getting me more readers. I have no idea, because it kind of blurred together. So don't do what I did, and give it like a week or so between your BookBub deal and another one. But do try to schedule like, another promo 5 days or so after your BookBub deal, so that way you can kind of, take advantage of the spike in sales and have that kind of keep the momentum going a little. So that's what I've been doing. That's what I've been working on. As I said, I'm still learning stuff. I made a lot of mistakes in my BookBub. I'm hoping to not make next time. For example, they send you an email like every day for like 2 days leading up to the BookBub saying, make sure you check your prices. Have you checked your prices yet? Make sure you do that. And I, in my absolute vanity, did not check my prices because I thought I dropped the price on January 1st. Why would it change now? Amazon as well. So, on the morning of my BookBub deal, I got an email from BookBub that said, hey, your book is not free in Canada, so we're not going to include that link. And turns out they were right. It was $6 in Canada.
Oh no.
I don't know why. I didn't set it to $6. It was free last I had looked. And so I emailed Amazon, I called them, and in the email back, they're like, we have the discretion to change the price, whatever. The person on the phone was a lot nicer about it. She immediately changed the price, and it took effect within an hour. But by that point, the email had already gone out, so I lost out on some Canadian readership there. So next time I do a BookBub, I will, in fact, check all the prices and not assume that it's fine. So don't be like me.
Shout out to all of our Canadian listeners. Don't worry, Letters to Half Moon Street is still free. You can still get in on this deal.
Please go download it. Another thing that you should know before you start, because I didn't really know this in advance, is that most of these promo sites require a mini blurb of some kind. Sometimes they require your full blurb. Sometimes they require the mini blurb. BookBub writes your mini blurb for you, which is a fascinating distinction.
Fascinating and terrifying, frankly.
Yeah, it is. I had a book blurb expert professional look at it, actually, because I talked to her on the day of my deal. And so we looked over it together and she's like, this isn't bad. I could have done better. And now I'm taking a class with her so I can learn how to do better.
Fantastic.
I was reading the blurb and it said captivating fantasy and a captivating series. And I'm like, I never said that. You wouldn't have called my books captivating. That's a little bold for me.
That said, as someone who's read them, I would say captivating.
Thank you. Are you at BookBub?
That would be a heck of a prestige on my part.
That would be quite a twist.
Just taking off my Scooby-Doo mask to reveal I was BookBub all along.
You're over here asking me all my questions. I'm giving my silly little answers, and you're like, turns out I am an expert for years, and you're wrong about everything you just said.
No.
Oh God. No. So most of them require like a 200 characters or 300 characters or less. So I recommend either taking a class, hiring a person, or at very least workshopping your blurb to get a 300 characters or less blurb out of it. So that way you're prepared, because 3 months now and I like make it up every time. It's like, I don't know. What did I write last time? I'm running out of ways to describe my book in 50 words. So I'm taking a class tomorrow by Book Blurb Magic where she's going to teach me how to do this. So looking forward to that. But I think that's everything that I have learned. So a general bit of advice that I didn't really start until, I don't know, last year at some point, I think, is to get comfortable with the reports on the sites that you sell to. Because for me, I don't think anything has really boosted my confidence more than numbers, which is not something I thought I would say as a writer. But it's hard to argue against numbers. Like last year, this time last year, I felt like I had stalled in my writing career and I felt like I wasn't doing very well and I didn't know what to change or what to do differently, which is pretty incredible since right now I'm, I think actually by the beginning of March, I had made more sales than I had all of last year. So definitely improving. But one of the reasons I know that I'm improving is because I'm tracking all of these numbers. And it can go, in a bad direction where you can get obsessive and be like me and check it every day, which is completely ridiculous and unnecessary. But if you have better self-control and more chill, then it's nice to pull up numbers and add it to a little spreadsheet and be like, wow, those are how many downloads I had this month. And oh, this is better than where I was this time last year. I had this many downloads, and this year I have this many downloads. And it's just, even if it's not a massive increase, it's still nice to look at, to have something quantifiable to kind of prove to yourself that you're doing something and that it's making a difference and that you are making sales, even if it doesn't feel like it, because I think our perception is always kind of skewed against us. And so when you just look at the numbers and you don't write it down, you think, oh, see, I don't know. This is what it looked like yesterday or a month ago. So I'm still treading water. I'm not making a difference. But if you are charting it or keeping track of it somewhere, then you can see when you have growth and you can see sometimes when things do well or when you get a bump in sales. And it can be helpful in terms of planning ahead, and it can also just be helpful for something as simple as encouragement and to give you something to celebrate. I had like 5 different milestones lined up for when one of the books outsells what it did last year. One of my milestones was getting 10,000 downloads and I've surpassed it. So like, it's nice to have milestones even if you aren't doing anything specific to get them. So that way when you do reach them, you have something to celebrate. Because I think indie authors don't always celebrate the little milestones. We celebrate the big ones and then we get discouraged between the big milestones. So having a little milestone along the way is helpful.
And if you love statistics and charts and interpreting data, that's not a word. If you like to see someone who knows more about numbers talk about them in a way that makes sense, you should follow Sarah Wallace on Instagram.
I should teach a class on keeping track of your reports, your reporting, because that has been really helpful to me. Yeah, do follow me on Instagram. I'm sarah.wallace.writer, Sarah with an H. Yeah, I do a monthly recap on how my downloads have gone and how many sales I've done. And I've started being more transparent in this stuff because I noticed as a new author, I didn't see that anywhere and there was nothing to compare myself to. You don't want to compare yourself in the way of, robbing you of joy, etc. But like, it's nice to know, like, I basically have no context for how well I'm doing. other than my own. So I'm creating my own context so I can know, okay, this time last year I was making this many, this time this year I'm making this much, so I'm doing better. But there isn't a lot of transparency in the author sphere from what I've seen. You basically get the authors who say that they're making no sales, and then you have the authors who are making six figures. And it's hard to find the people who are between that.
Yeah, everyone in between is kind of just floating in the void.
Yes, and I'm trying to be that in between for people so that way people can kind of know what to expect I'm at 2 years now of being an indie author, a little over 2 years. And so it's nice to have that for myself and hopefully for other indie authors who are just getting started or just learning about this stuff. I'm hoping that I can provide some, I don't know, I keep saying transparency, but a better idea, better context of what they could potentially be, what it could be looking like for them.
And I do love data in context.
Me too. The people at work always say the data needs to tell a story, and we do love stories around here, so.
We do. Well, thank you so much for teaching us all about permafreeze.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And in addition to your Instagram, where else can people catch up with you and your books?
I'm primarily on Instagram. I do have a Facebook page. It's Sarah Wallace Writer. I've kept that pretty consistent across everything, so if you search Sarah Wallace Writer, you will find me somewhere. My website is sarahwallacewriter.com. You can sign up from my newsletter there. And then I send out a newsletter every month, so you can be up to date with all of my new releases and what's going on with me, and sometimes get sneak peeks at projects that I'm working on. So Instagram and my newsletter are the best places to find me.
And check out Letters to Half Moon Street, which I hear is permanently free.
Free! Go read it!